Sacrifice on the Trail of Hoodo Gold by Clyde Gilmore. Fascinating new evidence has come to light in the never-ending chain of facts, memories, and half-legends surrounding British Columbia's famed Hoodo Gold, the Lost Creek Mine, with its half-century legacy of heroism, villainy, and death. The original story was told in an article entitled Hoodo Gold, Death to the Tenderfoot, in the January 18th issue of the Vancouver Daily Province Saturday magazine. Instantly it recalled the memory of an unforgettable evening to a Vancouver dentist, Dr. John Gadsner, 6037 Sperling. Since then, other British Columbians similarly have added small pieces to the ancient jigsaw puzzle of Lost Creek, although the whole story may never be fully documented. Readers of the previous article will recall Lost Creek as a fabulously rich gold mine believed to have been discovered about 1890 by a swaggering half-breed Indian named Slumach. On several occasions, the Indian was seen in New Westminster carrying a knapsack bulging with nuggets of raw gold, some of which he squandered on drunken parties. Death on the gallows. White men tried to wrest his secret from Slumach, but he wouldn't talk. Finally, he was convicted of the hunting knife murder of a young squaw who had been his helper. Slumach was hanged at New Westminster on January 16, 1891. Just before he went to the gallows, he is said to have confessed that he had slain not just one squaw but 8, to make sure his secret would be protected. In the more than 50 years that have followed, at least 20 persons are known to have lost their lives trying to find Slumach's hidden El Dorado. One of them, as mentioned in the January 18th article, was a boastful old prospector named Volcanic Brown. And it is in connection with Volcanic Brown that the Vancouver's Dr. John Gadsner tells a true story that reads like something out of the pages of a pioneer melodrama. The story has everything Hollywood could ask for except boy meets girl romance. It tells of sudden riches, stealth, and the pursuit in the wilderness, an ethical and emotional struggle ending with the sacrifice as gallant as any in the world of fiction. The story goes back to an evening in the fall of 1936 or 37. Dr. Gadsner is not quite sure of the date. He was living in Nelson in those days. With him on a deer hunting trip along the Kettle River were 3 Nelson cronies, W.E. Wasson, W.G. Brody, and the late George Ferguson, one of the district's best-known old-timers. The 4 men were just beginning to cook supper in a snug cabin at Deer Creek, 25 miles north of Westbridge. They had plenty of food and a supply of good, honest whiskey in those days before BC started The 4 men were just beginning to cook supper in a snug cabin at Deer Creek, 25 miles north of Westbridge. They had plenty of food and a supply of good, honest whiskey in those happy days. There was a knock on the door. Lantern in hand, Dr. Gadsner opened the door and flashed the light on a tiny, skinny old man, roughly clad in typical prospector's garb. His eyes, tired but twinkling with friendliness, squinted behind small lenses held in gold frames. "Evening," the old man grinned. "My name is Volcanic Brown. I'm also known as Doc Brown to my friends and to some of my enemies. I'm hungry, and I'm thirsty, and I'm a bit lonely too. Can I come in a spell?" Dr. Gadsner stood aside. "Come in," he said. Volcanic Brown must have been at least 70, grateful, sat down, spread out his hands above the cabin's hearty fire. Old-timer Ferguson took a huge mug and half filled it with whiskey. Volcanic Brown drank it in 2 majestic gulps. Almost immediately his cheeks reddened comfortably. He patted his skinny old stomach as the liquor warmed it. The whiskey did more than take the chill out of him. It loosened his tongue, if any loosening had been needed. Grinning and nodding, Volcanic Brown talked, and as he talked he ate a meal which would have filled 2 ordinary men twice his size. Almost forgetting their own appetite, the 4 Nelson men listened in fascination and watched bug-eyed as the old prospector wolfed down an entire loaf of bread, an immense slice of cheese, a helping bowl of rice and raisin pudding, a dozen strips of bacon, and a mug after mug of scalding coffee. This is the story he told them, and for all of his eccentricities there was something of strength and manhood and sanity in the old man's bearing that made the story ring true, fantastic though it sounded. Volcanic Brown, a bachelor and a long-time resident of the Grand Forks district, was more than a prospector and a soldier of fortune. He was a healer, a rough, untutored herbalist who sometimes did things with natural medicines that city slicker medicos couldn't quite explain. That's why he was sometimes called Doc. One day in the wilds many years ago, he found an old Indian woman suffering from a chronic, incurable ailment. Volcanic Brown cured her with one of his secret herbs. In almost speechless gratitude, the squaw passed on him a precious secret. She was the daughter of one of several Indian kingsmen of the half-breed Slumach. Shortly before he was hanged, she said Slumachs could told her father how to find the Lost Creek mine, where a man could pick up gold nuggets as big as hen's eggs. His hands trembling with excitement, Volcanic Brown drew a crude but reasonably accurate map based on the squaw's directions. Then he went searching for the Lost Creek mine. And he found it. Sitting there with 4 Nelson hunters, his steamy old face half in shadows, half illuminated by the crackling log fire. I'm going to start this again. Grinning with gratitude, the squaw passed on to him a precious secret. She was the daughter of one of several Indian kinsmen of the half-breed Slumach. Shortly before he was hanged, she said Slumach had told her father how to find the Lost Creek mine, where a man could pick up gold nuggets as big as hen's eggs. Slumach had told the truth. His hands trembling with excitement, Volcanic Brown drew a crude but reasonably accurate map based on the squaw's directions. Then he went searching for the Lost Creek mine. And then he found it. Sitting there with the 4 Nelson hunters, his seamy old face half in shadows, half illuminated by the crackling log fire, Volcanic Brown calmly told of picking up nuggets as big and as plentiful as the half-breed murderer had described. But Volcanic Brown, of course, would not say where the treasure was. When the hunters half kindly asked him, he just grinned and nodded, then politely went on with his story. He took an unspecified amount of the Lost Creek gold, he said, to his sister in Seattle. She traded it to a bank for cash and opened a fat savings account for Volcanic. Naturally, he decided to return to the mine for more gold, but something which he didn't explain made it impossible for him to try the trip again for a long, long time. He'd been busy, that's all. Stories still heard around Nelson and Grand Forks hint that Volcanic Brown, who had a short temper on occasion, got into trouble with the law for attacking with a shotgun a trespasser who invaded his property in Grand Forks. Finally, though, the tough old prospector did go looking for the Lost Creek again. And this is where his story suddenly enters into the realm of stealth pursuit and high sacrifice. Somebody with greed in his soul followed Volcanic Brown into the wilderness, up the Fraser from New Westminster to the outlet of Pitt Lake, then 15 miles the whole length of the lake to the mouth of the Pitt River, then many miles upstream, then on through the grim trails and chasms that led towards his El Dorado. And footnote, chasms is right when going through that area. Volcanic knew he was being followed because no matter how often he deliberately changed his course, always at night he could see the smoke of his pursuer's campfire some distance behind him. Until finally one night Volcanic did not see any distant smoke. Most men might have jumped into the conclusion that the pursuer, wearying of the chase, had given up and turned back. But in the mind of Volcanic Brown there burned a bright, stubborn curiosity, and the kind of courage it takes to walk calmly into a possible trap. The old prospector did an almost incredible thing. He went back to investigate, and he found his pursuer groaning in a gully with a broken leg. To a man with Christian scruples, it was a dreadful dilemma that confronted Volcanic Brown, and this is how he solved it. Should he laugh at the enemy who had set out to plunder him and walk away, leaving him to his just fate? Or should he, in the name of common humanity, help him back to civilization and medical aid, thus sacrificing all the toll and expense and discomfort he himself had borne in attempting to take a further haul from the Lost Creek? The 4 Nelson hunters listened wittingly, almost in embarrassment, while Volcanic Brown told him of his decision. He took his injured pursuer back to New Westminster, got him a doctor, did not even try to take any action against him. What would be the use? There is no law against following a man in the wilderness, as long as you do him no violence. And that as far as the life of Volcanic Brown had progressed on that autumn evening about 10 years later, when the 4 Nelson men gave him food and drink and shelter. What followed has already been narrated in these pages, how Volcanic Brown returned for his next Lost Creek venture with feet so badly frozen he had several toes amputated, and how on his next attempt he swore he'd either fetch more of Slumach's Hoodo nuggets or never come back. And now he never came back. Dr. Gassner's story thus richly arguments the still partly legendary chronicle of Volcanic Brown, and for the first time discloses that the old prospector actually did find Lost Creek. Brown made it in all 4 trips there. The first was successful, the second was interrupted by his great-hearted sacrifice. The third ended in frozen feet and partial cripplement. The fourth ended in silence and death. Dr. Gassner says Brown was called Volcanic because he owned a low-grade copper mine known as Old Volcanic near Grand Forks. Nor is this all of the story. One other ingredient was supplied by the squaw, who in her gratitude to her healer first told Volcanic Brown about Slumach's treasure and how to find it. Her own father, she told Brown, had tried to reach Lost Creek himself. Full of confidence and carrying Slumach's own detailed directions, he had started out to bring back an undreamed of fortune. But he never made it. Somewhere along the way, somewhere in the midst of Pit Lake's ring of sullen peaks and treacherous trails, the Indian fell and broke his hip. He remained a cripple until he died. Hoodoo gold? Maybe not, but don't try to argue the point with BC's old-timers. It is cursed. Go look for it. Out.